Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Radio Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk radio. Be advised that the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. Here's your conservative, but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
My friends, 1 year ago yesterday, it would have been yesterday, President Trump's life was nearly taken from him. I'm going to talk about that today. There's so much that's been going on. There's so little, I should say, curiosity in the media, interest in what happened, getting to the bottom of it. Just imagine if they paid 1/10 of the attention they paid to the attempted assassination of Trump as they did to January 6th, which I've made myself clear on January 6th. For those who broke the law, they need to face consequences for breaking the law. For those who did not break the law, they should not be held to account for anything. And for any shenanigans that would have happened on January 6th, those need to be exposed, and the people involved there need to be held accountable as well. This isn't difficult for someone who really wants to see justice and truth prevail. So that's what I want to talk about here today. I hope you had a great weekend, by the way. I had a nice weekend. I had the privilege of traveling. I told you this on Friday, out of town with my son. We went to Austin, Texas for a day trip, and we had a great time. I've been close to the city of Austin before, never been in the city. We did go to the Presidential Library, LBJ Presidential Library. My son likes to do. He's been to 3 of these. He's been to Reagan's Library in California. He's been to Eisenhower's in Kansas, I think. And of course, we went to LBJ's here over the weekend in Austin. I told my son I loved seeing the city and enjoyed the library, even though I feel like LBJ might be perhaps my least favorite. He's up there on the list, least favorite presidents. My, oh my, you talk about an era of corruption and just, it's amazing. And I told my son as we were on this trip, I said, it's interesting looking around at the library. I said, they spend money to get elected, which again, this isn't to say that you shouldn't have to do those things. It's just interesting for me to think about. You spend money to get elected, you spend money to get reelected, and then when your term's over, you raise money, you raise money to get elected, raise money to get reelected, raise money then to build a library to tell people how great you were when you were elected and running a particular branch or office or whatever. In this particular case, the executive branch of the country. But anyway, my friends, I'm going to talk today about President Trump, the attempted assassination, July 13th, 2024. That was a year ago yesterday. We'll do that here, my friends, in due course. But let's face it, there are a lot of companies out there that do not share your Christian values. The good news, well, you don't have to invest in them. At 4-8 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. They'll help you screen out companies that go against your faith and your values and create a plan that's tailored to your goals. And they'll handle all the heavy lifting so that you can focus on what really matters to you, to your family, to your future. So, do you want to see if your current investments align with your values? If you do, all you got to do is go to this website I'm about to give you, complete a very short assessment, and you will find out if your investments align with your values. All you got to do is go to 48financial.com/Todd. That's 48financial.com/Todd. That's where you go for the assessment. 48 Financial, because your values matter, and so does your money. So a year ago yesterday, President Trump was at a campaign speech in Butler, Pennsylvania. You remember this vividly. You remember this well. And it's interesting as I say this that we were at, again, LBJ's presidential library in Austin, Texas, which, of course, reminds me of what happened on November 22nd, 1963, when John F. Kennedy, president at the time, was actually assassinated. You know, as we were in that museum, you know, I've followed, read about, I've always been a little bit intrigued. I'm not to the level of some of these folks who know details and factoids and all the testimony and that sort of thing of people who were there at Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. But I have always had an interest in this. In fact, I think the interest arose first when I watched the movie, Oliver Stone's JFK, back in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, I don't know. But I was fascinated by that story and was perplexed as a young man as to how the government could reach the conclusion it did through the Warren Report. Again, this was back when I was more naive, I guess, more trusting of my government. This was back before, probably about 10 years or so, before I first started listening to Rush Limbaugh, realizing that there are people in our country who hate our country. There are people in our government that hate our country. There are people in our government that are capable of some really atrocious things. By the way, there are people in all parts of our lives, they don't have to just be in government, who are capable of all sorts of things. Truth be told, as sinners who've fallen from a God, we're all capable of atrocious things. But this government has had some sick and disgusting things that have happened under her watch, the Kennedy assassination being one of those things. And as I was there in that presidential library, there's a particular section, a lot of it's about the Vietnam War, which of course was tremendously ratcheted up under LBJ. You find information about the Tet Offensive, and just you can walk through the museum and see the uniforms worn by the soldiers, and just information about the Vietnam War. And there's a piece of, at least on temporary display, a piece of the Vietnam Wall that's on display there that was manufactured, but it had a defect, like a chip in the upper right corner, so that particular panel it didn't pass muster for being installed in Washington, D.C., and so I don't know where it's kept normally, but right now, at least for the next month or so, it's going to be at LBJ's library. And there's names, right? Names of people. If you've been to the Vietnam War Memorial, you know what I'm talking about. 58,000 names carved into rock in Washington, D.C. Just to see all those names is quite a... It's an amazing, just humbling experience to think about the people who gave the ultimate sacrifice. And I know I don't want to get into the Vietnam War and all that stuff, but as I'm thinking about all this, the things that, the overlap even from LBJ and the Kennedy assassination and what happened yesterday, a year ago, there's a picture in the LBJ presidential library, and it shows JFK riding alongside his wife, Jackie, in the convertible prior to the assassination, and they're sitting there. And then there's a picture, as you walk through the display, there's a picture of LBJ being sworn in. It's hard to tell from the picture, but it was aboard Air Force One, and Jackie Kennedy was standing right next to him. And of course, I never really pieced this together. This all happened the same day. I knew he got sworn in immediately, but I didn't realize she was present. And she was still wearing the same clothes that she was wearing when the assassination took place hours earlier that day. And what's particularly, I guess, remarkable to me about that is that, I don't want to be too graphic here, If there's young ears, please just be mindful of this, what I'm about to say. But when that fatal blow struck Kennedy and hit him in the head, Jackie Kennedy had some of that material, I'll just say it that way, that ended up on her. Even parts, as I understand it, of JFK's brain. And so there she is hours later being sworn, or not being sworn in, being standing next to the man who's being sworn in shock. You can just see it on her face. I mean, just imagine, right? I say all this, not to go back to 1963, but I say all this to go back to 2024 and to say that we were close. I know Trump wasn't the sitting president, but we were very close to having the same imagery, the same outcome, the same headlines, the same just facts and pursuit of what actually happened, which we should have anyway, but what actually happened on July 13th, 2024, when President Trump was mere millimeters away from being assassinated and murdered that day. That happened. You remember where you were. My son and I were actually together. We were working out, lifting weights, and I don't know if I got a text or I saw an alert on my phone or something. And it's interesting, if you remember the first headlines, some of them were very nondescript. In fact, one of them, if I remember correctly, said something about there was a sound of gunfire and the president fell to the ground or something. It was anything to avoid saying that Trump had been shot by some lunatic madman, someone who had drawn inspiration from the radicals who say some of the most atrocious, wicked, vile things about President Trump. But we all remember where we were, and that was very close to a life-altering moment. We all have a few of those. For me and my generation, I remember distinctively where I was when I saw the Space Shuttle Challenger explode in 1986. I was in elementary school. We were watching that. It blew up. I remember coming home that day, and that was all that was on the news. I was too young to understand. I wanted to watch whatever I wanted to watch, back when you're a kid and the way you think. But that was a time, just a very monumental, I guess, experience for those of us who lived through it. Likewise, I remember exactly where I was on September 11th. I was driving. I had just gotten a new job about a month, not even a month, a couple weeks prior. I was driving downtown Indianapolis. Ironically, I was passing the Indianapolis International Airport on my way downtown for training, and I had heard that a plane had struck the World Trade Tower. I had no idea the size and scope of the Trade Tower. I had never been to New York City. I knew that sounded odd, but it didn't really immediately occur to me that was a passenger plane. I thought it might have been someone who didn't know what they were doing at the controls, and who knows, lost control or something like that. Was perhaps someone who wanted to take in their own life or something like that. Of course, later that day, I heard of the second plane hitting the other tower, and then the collapse of the towers and all of that was to follow. But you remember where you were for things like that, and this was a moment that could have radically changed life as we knew it. And it's interesting, I saw a little bit of an interview of a journalist, actually the journalist who was set to interview Trump immediately before his speech at Butler, Pennsylvania last year. And as these things go, it was kind of a back and forth thing. The interview got moved to after the speech, then they moved it to Air Force One and all sorts of things, right? Just the way that media works, especially when they're trying to fit you into a schedule. And anyway, Trump knew this journalist. I'm drawing a blank on her name. I have it in the stack of stuff. But he basically called for her prior to his going out on stage. She was one of the last people to see him before she might have been the last to see him before he went out on stage. He just wanted to say, thank you for coming. I look forward to speaking with you later, that sort of thing. And she just recounts some of the story and where she saw this unfold, which was right there where the photojournalists are, where these pictures, these images had been snapped and taken. And, you know, it's undeniable for those of us who have followed politics, followed Trump, have been to a rally, have watched rallies on TV. There's a couple things that Trump didn't do that he did that day that saved his life. And if you ask Trump, which they have, Trump says, I see God as being the one, Trump says, that spared my life that day. Trump says God saved his life. Of course, people can mock that and ridicule that and so forth, but for those of us who believe in a God that cares about us personally, as the Bible tells us, as the Bible demonstrates, as Jesus' actions clearly portray, for those of us who know that God, Yahweh, the God of the Bible, the one who was and is to come, for those of us who know him, it's absolutely within his character to be involved in the affairs of men and the lives of people. And we're talking mere millimeters. I don't know. I guess you either have to chalk it up to pure luck or to the hand and grace of God. Trump has chosen to say that God spared his life, which I find quite fascinating and even encouraging. So I want to keep talking about this for a moment. But friends, if you are at a business, if you own a business, if you're in marketing, if you are in HR, if you're someone at your company who has to get branded merchandise, that can range from hats and shirts to trade show materials to giveaway products to booths to banners to you name it. Anything with your logo on it, Red, White, and Brand is here to help you. redwhiteandbrand.com, that is the website. You can go there, take a look at what you can get, but candidly, the best way is to just reach out through the website because there are so many products. It's helpful just to have the assistance of people here at Red, White, and Brand. So, redwhiteandbrand.com is the website address. Promo code Todd will get you a 10% discount on your first order. And by the way, if you go ahead and complete your order on the website, you'll get free shipping as well. redwhiteandbrand.com, promo code Todd. All right. So what about this notion that Trump's life was spared by God? This is an interesting thing to think about, even amongst Christians, right? I mean, it's one thing to say that God can do it, because he obviously can. It's another thing to say he will in the future sense do it, or he did in the past sense do it. Sometimes we don't know. Now, we do know that he is completely sovereign and that nothing happens without his, he can choose to stop anything. Nothing happens without him at least allowing it to happen, which, of course, these are where some of these difficult questions arise. I think often sincerely, sometimes not so sincerely, about the old problem of evil, the problem of pain. How do you justify God if bad things happen in this world, if people have suffering, then doesn't that, the skeptic will ask, the atheist will ask, doesn't that prove that either God isn't all-powerful enough to stop it from happening, or he's not all good enough to prevent it from happening? Because suffering is bad, and suffering, and God is good, so why doesn't he just make good things happen? And then, so you're left with he either doesn't want to do good. This is their thinking. This is not my thinking, by the way. I'm just explaining their position. Either God doesn't care and is okay with suffering and evil, goes the argument, or God cares, but he can't do anything about it, which really undermines who he is as God. Which one is it? That's what the skeptics will ask. Which one is it? Does your God not care, or is your God not powerful enough? You tell us. It's kind of like they think they've got you trapped. It's just like when they ask the old question about, can God make a rock that's too big, too heavy for him to lift? Which I find a little bit comical, because God is infinite, and anytime you make a physical object, you've stepped out of the infinite into the measurable, right? A rock is a certain size, and of course, God's infinite strength is greater than whatever rock he created. Now, you can't create an infinitely sized rock because a rock has certain dimensions. So that it's a self-defeating even question to raise. But nonetheless, people think sometimes people are genuinely confused about this. Sometimes people use these things as an excuse to justify their lack of belief or lack of desire, really, to have a relationship with their Creator. And I suppose that's their freedom to do so. But the mind will justify what the heart desires. But Trump says that God intervened that day. Do you think that was the case? I mean, what's interesting is this reporter said, she'd been covering dozens of Trump's rallies. You've all watched some of Trump's rallies. Some of you have been. I've been to, I think, two or three. I went to the one at the end. It wasn't a Trump rally. Trump spoke at the NRA convention in Indianapolis. I went to that. I was in the press pool for that one. That was quite the experience. It's quite the experience when you're standing in the press pool and Trump says, "Look at these folks down here. These very dishonest folks," right? Talking about the media. Some of them are okay, I found it highly entertaining. It's also interesting to have the ire of the entire audience, upon you. But I will tell you this, I didn't feel like it was, a lot of people talk like it's, you're about to be attacked. That wasn't the feeling at all. There was a lack of respect and a certain agreement amongst the attendees that the people in that area were completely to blame for a lot of the problems and misunderstandings about Trump, with which I agree, by the way. But it was almost, it felt like a bit of a game. They get the ruse. Like, they don't like people lying about Trump, but Trump's going to keep doing what he's doing, and let's focus on what we can actually control, which is supporting the message and the agenda of the president. But I was there. I went, he was at the fairgrounds, I think, during his, when he ran the first time. I believe I remember going to that one. And I think those are the two I went to. But some folks have been to dozens and dozens and dozens of these things. One of those was this journalist, and she said Trump does two things he never does. Number one, he doesn't really ever put graphics up on the screen, number one. Number two, he doesn't turn away from the audience. And those two things happened moments before those shots rang out that were targeting at the time, the former president of the United States, Donald J. Trump. And Trump says God intervened to save him. So quick timeouts in order, my friends. Got to take a break. You're listening here to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Talking here about President Trump, the assassination attempt that was placed upon him July 13th, 2024, a year ago yesterday. Trump says that God spared his life. And I want to say a couple of things about this. Number one, well, first of all, let me remind you that the money we spend, my friends, every dollar that we spend is a vote for the kind of America that we want to live in. That's why we launched here at the program, Freedom Marketplace. It's a free directory of businesses that align with your conservative values. These businesses have made a promise. They promise not to support leftist candidates or leftist causes. And if they break that promise, my friends, kaput, they're kicked out of the Freedom Marketplace directory. So if you're tired of funding the woke agenda, check out freedommarketplace.net. It is free. It's easy. You can support businesses that are pushing in the same direction that you are, my friends. Check it out, freedommarketplace.net. That's freedommarketplace.net. All right. So this idea of God intervening, this raises a lot of questions and a lot of emotions for people, because if God intervenes, why does he intervene in certain instances and not in other instances, right? Why does he spare the life, step in and do a miracle for one person, but doesn't do it for another? And the reality is, my friends, these are tough questions, but I think we can come to at least the conclusion or the agreement here that while we can understand that God has the ability to do any number of things. He's not obligated to do anything. And he uses his discretion and judgment. And we, as his created beings, simply have to accept that he knows better than we know. He has his reasons. The Bible does say, his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. We don't see things as he sees them. I've heard it explained this way. I think Tara Lee Cobble says this in her Bible recap study that I've done. If we knew all the things that God did, or that God knows, then we would make the same decisions that God makes. Assuming, of course, we're not trying to simply act in our selfish favor or something like that. But if we're trying to be good and just and we have all the information, then we would make the same decisions that God made. Of course, we're sinful people, but you get the sake of discussion here. If we're really intent on being just, then when all the information is known and all the details are there for us to see and to make sense of, God is, not that he has to be vindicated, but any questions about God's character will be vindicated. Now, you can say that that's easy to say, and you can say that that's convenient. And I would say I agree with that. I understand where you're coming from, and I agree with that. But this is a complicated issue. I just finished the book of Job. I've read it a couple of times, but I just finished the second time doing the Bible recap as I just started for a second time going through this, where you read through the Bible for a year, and there's studies that go through each of the days and all that sort of stuff, which I encourage you to check it out if you haven't. It's free on the Bible app. You can check it out. But I've done this this is my second time through. And when it comes to questions about suffering, it's very, very complicated. We don't know what's going on, for starters. And the book of Job is a great example where Satan basically approached God in ways, listen, I don't understand all this. I don't know how this works, but Satan said, hey, Job loves you because you give him everything you want. If you stop doing that, Job would not treat you, that would not hold you in that regard, would not worship you. And so God allowed Satan to test Job. And when I say test, I don't mean just like, hey, give him a bad day. I mean, this guy lost his children. This guy lost his business, his all of his wealth, all of his income, and he lost his health. He had boils. He was miserable. He went from being a man who had everything going for him into a man who lost everything in virtually the blink of an eye. And the book is about a lot of things, but the book is about his friends coming and basically trying to help him make sense of this, or more or less trying to blame Job. Job, what did you do to cause this? Now, in one sense, everything that we have experienced can be, that's negative, can in some way be traced back to humanity's sin, breaking the way that it worked with a loving God in the Garden of Eden. And we've all participated in that. But in a more direct sense, there are bad things that happen to people who aren't specifically deserving of them. You don't do something, every time that something bad happens to you, it doesn't mean that you caused it. Sometimes bad things just happen. Bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. By the way, how do you ascertain or differentiate between the two? Because if you get right down to it and you realize that we've all broken the law and that the payment for breaking the law and sinning is the giving of our life, that's the payment, that is the atonement for sin. Well, we can only pay that one time. And we don't have multiple lives to give. And so basically it comes down to whether or not we want to accept the gift of Jesus giving his life or not. I don't want to get maybe a little bit, but not too much into too preachy here with you this morning. But that is what this comes down to. It's what it comes down to. And there's not a more important decision you will make. I mean, these ideas we talk about on this program are important. Making sure that we have a government that is not too large or that's infringing upon our freedoms. Those things are critically important. Having an economy that allows people to work and provide for their families and all that sort of stuff, very, very important stuff. But none of these things all pale in comparison to what you are going to specifically do with the God of the universe? Do you want to be reconciled unto him or not? And so that, I would say, is the most important question, and it is a free gift to anyone. And if you listen, you can email me, and I will absolutely respond if you're struggling with this or have questions. Todd@toddhuffshow.com. But I really want to get into the questions here and this concept about God being involved, because God has every right to choose to be involved or to not be involved. That's his prerogative. In fact, if you get down to it, anything that we get outside of immediate death for challenging and rebelling against God personally is grace. So none of us have earned anything. So it's not like Trump earned God's favor, and I hope he doesn't think that. I'm not suggesting he does. But I think that that's a common path that Christians take. You think, well, God's come in and, cleaned me up. Now I start to do things that are pleasing to him. I've earned his... No, it's unmerited favor. Unmerited means undeserved. You didn't do anything to earn it. He gave it to you because he views you as he views his son, Jesus. For those of us who have been adopted into his family by falling upon our knees and repenting of our sins and asking Jesus to forgive us. Accepting, maybe I should say more appropriately, the forgiveness offered to all of us. And so here's Trump. He's on the stage, July 13th, 2024, puts a graphic on his screen that he doesn't ever do, and he turns his head. He turns his head as he's talking about the graphic. And was it a graphic about immigration or the economy or so? I don't even remember what the graphic was. But as he turns his head, you can hear shots ring out, and you can see Trump kind of pause and flinch and freeze for a moment, realizing I just got struck. And he goes down to the ground himself. Shortly thereafter, seconds, I don't even know if it was seconds, Secret Service comes, covers the president up. We know that there was a death that happened in the audience that day from someone who was hit by one of the assassin's bullets that was intended for Trump. And chaos ensued, and they eventually shot the gunman, and there's just chaotic scene. Trump rushed off of the stage, taken to the hospital, and suffered damage to his ear, was struck in the ear, but my, oh my, could have been infinitely worse. We all saw the pictures of the blood streaming from his ear. We all saw the pictures of Trump as he was standing up. He told Secret Service, hold on, don't be pushing me off stage. He just has such a natural knack for this. He looks up to the audience. He's kind of biting his bottom lip. He closes his fist, pumps his fist in the air, and starts mouthing the words, fight, fight, fight. And it's just this iconic picture that symbolizes the strength of this man and his unstoppable desire to get back into the White House and to fix the mess that has been created by the previous administration and by the radical leftists running our government prior to Trump returning there. Some of those folks are still deeply embedded, but we remember this. The grace of God, turning Trump's head at just the right moment to spare him by millimeters from having the same fate as JFK. Quick time out, my friends. You're listening to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. You know, when I put together the stack of stuff, there's actually a lot of stuff in the stack of stuff today, but I knew I was going to talk about this for a bit, and yeah, I know Trump's out there defending Pam Bondi, and he's getting pushed back on that still about the Epstein files, which we've talked about on this program lately. I'm not going to get to that today, especially at this phase, this lateness of the program. But I know there's other stuff out there. It's in the stack of stuff if you want to see some of the things that we were prepared to talk about here today on the program. ToddHuffShow.com. Just go to the stack, hat tip to the late, great Rush Limbaugh. But I want to finish just talking here and just asking some questions about Trump's belief, Trump's comment, about our founders' belief in who God was and his involvement in the affairs of men. You can find this in our founding documents. And yes, I understand that we had deists, but I also understand that we had people who are committed Christians who knew that the God of the Bible was involved in things on planet Earth. Maybe not everything every day, not because he's too busy. He's intimately involved in the lives of the people who are his children. This is a biblical concept. It's hard to sometimes accept and wrap our heads around, but nonetheless, that's the truth, my friends. That's at least the perspective of people who read and believe the Bible, people who framed the Constitution of this great nation. But before I get to that in the waning moments of the program, let me ask you something. Would you rather take 2 soft gels a day or spend hours in a doctor's office talking about your cholesterol? Because I know what I would choose, my friends. That's why I take Solti. It's an all-natural, clinically proven dietary supplement that has been proven. Science has spoken. The verdict is in that it lowers cholesterol. That means there's no prescriptions, there's no doctor's visits. This is a natural supplement. All you have to do is take 2 Solti soft gels a day. That's a great place, a great starting point to take care of your heart health and your cholesterol. So, that doesn't mean that's the only thing you need to do. Some of you may have to take further steps, but my oh my, if we're proactive, if we stay in front of it, and we just take the steps that we can take when we have the time to take them, which is now, my friends, you can avoid a lot of pitfalls in the future. Solti.com is where you can go, SOLTEA. Promo code Todd's going to get you 50% off your first order and free shipping to boot. Solti.com, SOLTEA, promo code Todd. All right, so the question then becomes, and you look at what the founders wrote in the Declaration of Independence about just God being involved in the affairs of men. And, you know, it's interesting because some folks certainly were deists. A deist is someone, as I was a young man, it was explained to me, someone who says they know that God created the universe, but he wound up the clock, he set it down on the shelf, and he walked away. But see, that's not biblical. I mean, in fact, you look at the story, God is an inherently intimate God. He wants to get to know his creation. When he created Adam and Eve, he walked with them in the garden each and every evening. In fact, I just, as I was doing this study again, or maybe I think it was this study I'm doing, it said when the question that God asked Adam and Eve, when he said, Adam and Eve, where are you? It wasn't God knew where they were. He wasn't asking them really their physical proximity. They were hiding from him because they were ashamed. They were fearful, right? They didn't just trust him out of this blissful sort of ignorance anymore. Their eyes had been opened to good and evil, and they realized that they were naked, they were ashamed, they were afraid, they had excuses. The serpent made me do it, the woman made me do it, finger pointing back and forth, just a mess. But as God came, as he did every day, to walk with his creation in the garden, to talk with them, commune with them, when he asked, where are you? There's a lot of Hebrew scholars that would say it was really, it wasn't so much where are you hiding, like are you behind the tree, are you hiding over there in the plants? Like, it was really a question of where is your desire to be intimate with me? Where are you? Why are you far from me? Why is your heart not near me? That's the same God, my friends, that has watched as the world has proceeded from that point in time, all the way through, of course, today, which is just a year after Trump was nearly assassinated. So while we can't always ask why God, or we can ask, but we can't always give an answer as to why God doesn't do a certain thing, intervene in a certain place, a certain time, we certainly recognize that he has the sovereignty to do it. We certainly we acknowledge that he has the heart to do it. He has the ability to do it. And I would suggest that there's evidence to show that he did do it. Now, you could say it was just coincidence, it was a lucky turn of the head, and maybe, I suppose, maybe. But for those of you who are the first to maybe think that, you could certainly say to me that by looking at the world through the lens of the Bible, I see God in places. You might say that he really isn't. And I would say maybe that's right. But perhaps it's also true that you don't see God where he some places is. And I think that, as Trump has said, that this was clearly a miraculous intervention by God for God's reasons. And I'll leave God can explain those or not explain those. That's not the point here today. The point here today is to remember where we were and how close we were to utter chaos, if not by the grace and hand of God, a year ago yesterday. But I got to run, my friends. SDG.